Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the chemical buffer systems of the body. This is kind of a acid-base urinary discussion. My name is Matthew Greer. This is produced through Grand Canyon University for Biology 520, Concepts of Human Physiology 2. My professor is Dr. Sandra Barrera, and the date is the 23rd of February. In this video, we're going to talk about the different chemical buffers of the body, how they help to maintain acid balance, and we're going to just generally touch on briefly at the beginning what acid base is, and then move into some studies on kidney stones and acid base chemistry. All right, so to begin with, let's do a little chemistry review. So an acid, this is something that donates hydrogen ions, H+, and a base is something that accepts hydrogen ions. So an acid, when it interacts with water, is going to release these hydrogen ions freely into the solution. So you're going to have more of them available. A base will do the opposite. It will kind of mop up and catch these hydrogen ions out of this aqueous solution and bind them into their structure. When we talk about pH, usually we're talking about the measure of the hydrogen ions. I have a pH scale here. Normal, neutral is this kind of middle ground here at 7 at distilled water. Anything below 7 or less than 7 is acidic. And these are things like black coffee and tomato juice and orange juice, and the stomach acid, gastric acid is down here at a 1. And then above 7 are things that are basic. Things like baking soda and ammonia and bleach and even soapy water from like regular dish soap is further up. Now, acids are going to have a higher amount of hydrogen and bases are going to have a lower amount of hydrogen. And that's important moving forward. Now, the question is, why is pH regulation important in the body? Why do we care about pH so much? Well, blood pH is a very narrow range for normal blood pH, and that's in between 7.35 and 7.45. Now, this is not neutral. This is slightly basic. Blood is usually slightly basic, but anything that goes down to or below a 7.2 we call acidosis, or we consider the blood to be acidic. And anything above 7.4 we kind of consider it to be alkalosis or alkalitic. And changes in pH affect the whole body. They affect proteins, they affect enzymes, they affect the CNS and K+ levels. Potassium, K+ is very important for heart function. And on both sides, either acidotic or alkalotic, it is negative impacts on pH and protein function, heart function, central nervous function. It's either too excitable in the case of alkalosis or not excitable enough. It's depressed in the case of acidosis. So maintaining this pH level is very important to maintain homeostasis, to keep the body alive. The kind of cutoffs here are below 7 is usually not a healthy place for the human body to be, doesn't last long, moves towards death there. And then above 7.8. So we got to keep it inside of this range for normal function. And anytime we get outside of that 7.35 to 7.45, the body is going to try to compensate to get back to this middle range. So how do we get acidic or basic blood, or acidic or basic fluid? There are 3 kind of sources inside of the body for how we get this acidicness. The first is carbonic acid formation. This is this example here where we have carbon dioxide and water in the bloodstream or in the bodily fluid, and it's getting converted by carbonic anhydrase to this carbonic acid, which will dissociate. These arrows mean that they can go back and forth. It is a reversible reaction to bicarbonate and hydrogen ion. Now, if we add more stuff on this side, if I add more carbon dioxide, because of Le Chatelier's principle with chemistry, this is going to move this way. It's going to move to the right, and that will cause more hydrogen, and we will have more acidicness inside of the body. The second way that we get this H plus inside of the body is from the breakdown of nutrients and inorganic acids that are in them. And this is how we get sulfuric and phosphoric acid. And this is very common to get from breaking down things like meats, grains, dairy products, nuts, eggs. All of these things produce these sulfuric and phosphoric acids. And even though these aren't these carbonic acids from before, these acids still donate or dissociate into hydrogen ions. And these hydrogen ions are able to increase the acidity of the body, which is something we want to avoid. And then the last one is organic acids from metabolism. These are things like fatty acids and lactic acids. So when you go through an extreme or strenuous muscle exertion, you create lactic acid, which breaks down to lactate, this molecule here, plus a hydrogen ion. And once again, this free hydrogen ion here is what's causing this acidity in the body. So if we have increased workout, we get increased lactic acid, which breaks down to this lactate and hydrogen ion and increases the acidity inside of the body. So how do we combat all of these H plus sources? Because the whole point of the excretory system and urinary system and the acid-base chemistry here is to make sure that our input equals our output. So how do we make sure that all of our body tissues don't become acidic? To resist this change in pH, either towards acidity or alkalinity, the body has a system of buffers that it uses. And these buffer systems are meant to resist change in pH, either acidic or alkalinic. We want to keep it in that very narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45. So we don't want to be any more basic and we don't want to be any more acidic. So let's kind of work through it a little bit in this kind of example of carbonic acid and the bicarbonate hydrogen system here, this first buffer system here. As we get more hydrogen inside of the body, for whatever reason, our body is going to want to get rid of it. As the concentration of this goes up, this is going to want to move to the left here. It's going to want to turn to carbonic acid, and then carbonic anhydrase can split it back into carbon dioxide and H2O. Once we get it to this form, we can breathe off excess carbon dioxide. We can take this carbon dioxide and exhale it using the lungs and remove some of the substance. In this way, we're moving these hydrogen ions towards this side, turning them into water, which is a more neutral compound that isn't going to affect the pH as much. On the reverse side, if we have more basic going on this side, we have more carbon dioxide, it would push this reaction this way. Carbonic anhydrase would be finding more of these substances, turning them into carbonic acid, and then turning it into bicarbonate and hydrogen ion. And bicarbonate, we kind of have this ability to excrete in the kidneys. So if we really needed to, we could get rid of bicarbonate and continue to move more and more this way. In the second buffer system, this one, the carbonic acid bicarbonate hydrogen ion system is very common in the ECF, the extracellular fluid. In our next example, the protein buffer system. Proteins are awesome buffers because they have both a amino group and a carboxylic acid group. They are themselves this nice little buffer. Each one of these amino acids has this nice area here that as pH rises or goes more towards basic side, this hydrogen here will break off and create more hydrogen in the solution, which decreases the acidity, moves it back towards the baseline. And on the other side, if we get acidic, this H plus here is going to add on to this amine group here on the end. And as this does this, it takes another hydrogen out of the kind of bodily fluids and creates this nice move towards being more neutral or being more closely regulated to that 7.35, 7.45. The protein buffer system is more common inside of the ICF, the intracellular fluid, because there is a ton of protein in the body. 50% about of the body's dry weight is protein. So it is a very common thing. We have a lot of this ability to buffer pH changes in the intracellular fluid. In our third buffer system, the hemoglobin buffer system, this is when we are taking this extra carbon dioxide from tissue cells and getting ready to transport it back up to the lung. And this helps reduce the acidity of blood by taking this carbon dioxide, and as it is being split here and to bicarbonate and then bicarbonate ion and hydrogen, this hydrogen is actually getting bound to this hemoglobin molecule here. So it is being carried on this red blood cell, and when it's carried on the red blood cell, it's not in the bloodstream, therefore it can't actually contribute to the acidity of the blood. In the last buffer system we're going to talk about, the phosphate buffer system, this one is very common in the kidneys and kind of the more renal side of the body. And the phosphate buffer system is really important when it comes to urine. As these hydrogens here are being excreted, this phosphate, which is normally humans take in more phosphate than we use, so the excess is excreted into the urine. This phosphate here is able to bind another hydrogen and become this NaH2PO4, and then this whole molecule can be excreted in urine. The nice thing about this is this takes this extra hydrogen out of this fluid, so we're not having super acidic urine because of the way that the kidneys work. It's all built on filtration and things moving down their osmotic and concentration gradients. So taking and keeping this substance less acidic allows more and more hydrogen ions to be excreted. So if we're trying to get rid of hydrogen ions, we need them to bind into this buffer to become less acidic so that we can continue to move this acidic substances down into the urine. All right, so let's switch gears here and talk about kidney stones and renal acid load. So in general, when we eat foods that are high in protein, such as meats, cheeses, eggs, we have an increased production of acid in the body. Where eating things like fruits and vegetables produces more alkalotic situations. The capacity of a food to create an acid or a base is something we call the potential renal acid load, or PRAL. In this study, we are looking at individuals who have kidney stones and seeing if their PRAL, their potential renal acid load from food intake, has any correlation on those kidney stones. Now, high PRAL can cause arterial hypertension, so high blood pressure, osteoporosis, as we're getting less calcium inside of these bones, and kidney stones, as we're getting more calcium buildup inside of the kidneys and ureters. Now, this study uses 123 participant pairs, where each person, 123 of them, had kidney stones, and 123 of them were control groups, where they didn't have kidney stones. And they were asked to kind of take these surveys about what they had eaten and these specific groups of foods they had eaten. The groups that included grains like pasta, rices, and cereals, meats like poultry and fish, cured meats, eggs, cheeses, potatoes, vegetables, fruits, and fruit juices. And portion size of these things were also kind of taken into account if one patient had more or less. The participants that had kidney stones, they had to be confirmed that they were these calcium oxalate stones, and to confirm them, infrared spectrometry was used. Now let's look at some data. And this is from the survey here, from the study here. And the first one is the risk of symptomatic renal stones according to potential renal acid load. And they kind of broke them down into these quartiles, with quartile 1 having the least amount of PRAL and quartile 4 having the most amount of PRAL, as increasing here. What we see here through these chi-squared kind of numbers is this Q4 is a very low chi-squared. That means that there is probably a high correlation between a high PRAL and a high incidence of kidney stones, of these calcium stones. Now, interestingly enough, the patients and the participants who had more vegetables, which have a lower PRAL, in the second kind of table here, this is the relative risk of stone formation by intake of vegetables in controls and renal stone formers. So in our renal stone formers, they had a lower kind of incidence here of more than 2 vegetables per day. But of the ones who did, and of these, the control that did here, that had more than 2 vegetables per day, we once again have a low chi-squared value here, which means that there is a strong correlation that that eating more vegetables decreases your likelihood of getting kidney stones. So it's no surprise, probably, that the major dietary risk factors for kidney stones overlap with the kind of high PRAL foods that we see, which are the high protein ones, the milk, the cheeses, the meats, the nuts, these foods that are high in protein, calcium, and potassium. So to decrease the likelihood of getting kidney stones, one should increase their intake of vegetables. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I hope that you learned a little bit more about the buffer systems of the body, that you got to see this nice kind of application as we are seeing more acids introduced to the body and the effects that that can have on renal load and kidney stone formation. For my references for this one, the information for the buffer systems came straight out of the textbook from Sherwood. And then the study involving kidney stones is here by Trinchieri, Maletta, Lozano, and Marchizzotti from the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.